Hello, everyone, and welcome to Speak Your Truth podcast by Kristen Bomas. I am your host, and this is a conscious journey to enlightenment. I thought today we would talk about emotional support animals. It seems to be a lot of talk about it, a lot of media about it. In particular, we've got some federal issues that are taking place through Senator Richard Burr that I'd like to address. So we'll talk first about the use of the animals and how a person with an emotional support animal is protected, and a little bit about what Richard Burr is looking to do with the Disability Act. Maybe not with the act, but with the emotional support animals in the act. So emotional support animals, you can imagine that I definitely see my share of people who are actually benefiting from an emotional support animal. An emotional support animal is not a pet, it is not a dog, it is not a cat, it is an animal. And the reason they structure that term separate is to draw a clear line between its purpose. And so I want to talk a little bit about how I see it working in people's lives and why I am a very strong advocate for emotional support animals. I have worked with people from the elderly down to middle school age people who are struggling with anything from post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, depression, bipolar. Actually, with bipolar, we prefer a therapy dog. I'll talk a little bit about that difference in a minute. And some grief issues as well that are more substantial, that they kind of border on trauma. I've watched people's lives get turned around because of their emotional support animal. When I do an interview to see what the capacity of the person is and the need for an emotional support animal, that is in context with the overall treatment, the healing of their emotional challenges. And everybody on this earth has emotional challenges, but some people really need some support. And the animal that is their support can be significant enough to allow them to move through this earth and through this life as free, much more free than otherwise. An example is someone who has anxiety flying and needs to fly for business or enjoys travel. The animal can give them the ability to move through airports, sit calmly on a plane, move through their anxiety, in a lot of cases not even experience the anxiety that they were experiencing. There are times with post-traumatic stress disorder that the animal is able to soothe the person suffering at all levels, whether it's through the anxiety of moving through life in any way, and trauma is a very different kind of anxiety than just generalized anxiety. But it helps with the sleeping, it can help with getting around, it can help with calming down, it can help with the breath. There are many ways that animal can help that person move through it. With depression, it helps us bring a more positive attitude, it gives them purpose, it helps them lift their spirits, and it allows us to heal the depression, in some cases with minimal to no medication. Those are just a few examples. I've watched students move from being very closed and asocial and not very interactive, making poor grades at best, not wanting to go to school and showing some phobic reaction to school, get a good emotional support animal, know how to use that animal, and turn all three of those things around 180. It's amazing to watch the healing that can take place with an animal. There has been a plethora of research showing that an animal in your life can instigate healing in all kinds of emotional support. And that's why we have emotional support animals. The ESA animal, as I'm going to call it, the ESA, is protected under the American Disabilities Act. An emotional support animal does not need specific training. They leave that responsibility up to the owner. And it is the owner's responsibility to be sure the animal is trained to be social, to know basic commands, and to know just general behavior issues like going to the bathroom and such. So the ESA is the responsibility of the person who is struggling, and a lot of times it is that very responsibility that that person needs to take that is part of the healing process. As I mentioned, in depression, it is giving that person a purpose. Sometimes in anxiety, it gives them a focus. So there's a lot of stuff that can actually come just from taking the responsibility of the animal. If you are living in any sort of a housing area that has restrictions and you have a legitimate ESA, there are all kinds of protections through the American Disabilities Act to allow you to live safely and privately with your ESA. So let's talk a little bit about what is happening now in the media and through everybody talking and carrying on. There's a question about why we have such an increase in ESA. We're seeing dogs everywhere now. My first response is, on this earth, there is no reason why we can't live unified with the animals as people. Forget the judgment. The problem isn't the animal. The problem, more often than not, is, are we training those animals to be social and publicly responsible? And that is because the owner is not taking the time to know their animal, train their animal, and help their animal know the change in environments. That's a problem. And that is a problem with an ESA because we don't have any training regulations that they need basic training. That may change. But there's also a lot of talk that people are taking advantage of this ESA, and that's why we have so many dogs and cats and animals out in the public areas now. And it's going to happen. It's absolutely going to happen. In every aspect of our existence, whether we're talking about an ESA, whether we're talking about the kids in Parkland, fighting for what they believe in, whether we're talking about the Me Too movement and what they are fighting for, anything that is change, you're going to have these peripheral people jumping on the bandwagon and taking advantage of the situation to their gain. That selfishness and entitlement that exists in this country exists at a base level. So of course we're going to see it in this as well. I'm not making light of it. I'm just saying that at least I am not comfortable letting that opinion or judgment skew the definition and need of ESA, because the need is quite important. And what's very scary at this time is Senator Richard Burr is trying to eliminate the ESA pretty much in the Senate. He's put a bill out now in May of 2018 to change this healing modality that we have available. And the people need to be aware that whether you see some people taking advantage of it or not, this is a very, very critical necessity for many. One of the reasons why we're seeing an increase in animals isn't because people are taking advantage of it or because everybody just wants to have their dogs with them, but because anxiety is at the highest it's ever been. We have more trauma diagnoses now than ever before. We are really struggling with balance in our lives, and so the stress is deteriorating emotional health because people in this country don't believe in going inward for their healing. Consequently, we have more challenges that are sitting actively presenting in our day-to-day lives. So one of the ways to find that balance, at least initially, is through an emotional support animal. So you are seeing more emotional support animals, and many of them are absolutely legitimate. But some of them, a few of them, may not be. And some of them may be important, but they're with an owner who doesn't understand the level of responsibility they need to take. Now, I am going to talk, kind of tongue-in-cheek, about emotional support animals being peacocks and kangaroos. The gerbil I'm not going to go toward. I think a gerbil or a hamster can make sense. I know people who can hold them and they sit right next to their heart, and so that little furry animal is very, very comforting. Somebody thinking that they're going to take a kangaroo or a peacock into an airport and claim emotional support. Well, It is emotional support. And apparently they aren't emotionally balanced enough to understand that level of responsibility and understanding. You know, it's great that your kangaroo is an emotional support animal, but it is not a realistic thought that you're going to move about this earth with a kangaroo next to you. I don't know how well trained this kangaroo is. Maybe it's trained very, very well. A peacock. How are you going to train a peacock not to poop when it wants to poop? How are you going to take a peacock out and about and around this world? It doesn't have the same stamina, the same capacity. It doesn't, you know, there are things that, again, we have to understand there's an emotional component here. I do think the airlines as a federal agency need to regulate the airports and the planes by making sure that if they want to add a leash to the necessity of an ESA, I understand. While leashes are not allowed to be required on an ESA outside of the airport or an airplane, I do understand they're getting ready to make a couple changes through the FAA, I get it confused all the time, to regulate, to put a couple extra pieces in on the ESA just so that there's more of a consistent flow and we don't have as many incidents. There are always going to be incidents through change time. We have to find out how we're going to find this balance. But let's be careful of our judgments, because I can honestly say that every single letter I write is because the person sitting before me is going to gain healing, freedom, and happiness from the support animal they have brought into their life. So let's open up our hearts and our minds. Let's look at the unity. And let's understand that our fellow Americans may be suffering from anxiety, from depression, from something else. And to give them that respect and dignity to move through this earth with an animal that gives them that opportunity. Now, before I close, I just want to say a quick thing about the difference between an ESA and a therapy dog. We have some mental illness that is a little bit more challenging than others. And so we have bipolar disturbances and some, we have some medical disturbances like diabetes and, I'm drawing a blank, some psychotic breaks that can occur, paranoid breaks, things like that. What we do is we train a therapy dog for clients like that, and I particularly like therapy dogs for my bipolar clients. The therapy dog can actually be trained to sense the difference between seizures. That's what I'm conveniently forgetting. Can actually smell and sense the difference as the client or patient is going into a manic episode or approaching on a seizure, or their sugars are about to go high or low. And in all of those cases and many others, we actually train the dog to know that cycle in the human being or owner of the animal. So that is a therapy dog. That is not an ESA. A therapy dog is highly trained. They are not inexpensive by any stretch. There are some charitable funds out there to help people afford that dog. They stay with the owner pretty much 24/7. They are always by their side, do not need to be on a leash, do not need to be identified. But just like a dog who works with the deaf or the blind, these dogs work with the emotional and physiological changes that take place during the changes during bipolar and the various other things I mentioned. So there is a very, very distinct difference between a therapy dog and an emotional support animal. Please understand that difference and don't allow ignorance in someone else to blur those boundaries, because they have very, very, very distinct differences and for very different needs. So that is my thought, my opinion, and a little bit of education on the ESA in America today. I really want to thank each and every one of you for listening. May you enjoy every dog's path that you cross, and may every day you reach out and try to pet that cat that crosses your path. Please join me again next week, and on Facebook I do a live broadcast on Mondays and Thursdays, much more interactional, so you can interact with me, tell me your thoughts and ideas, questions and opinions. I enjoy that very much, and I ask you to please subscribe to our YouTube channel. We are looking to grow, and your subscription means a lot to me. and to my team. So we thank you very much for joining us today. Have a wonderful day.